Hey everyone, it's Carissa at Sprinkled with Glitter. Thanks for joining me today. Before I get started with my card project today, I did want to mention I have an exclusive Instagram giveaway, so be sure you head on over to my blog for information on that, and I'll have it linked below. Today I am creating a birthday card featuring some of my favorite sets from the Pinkfresh Studio line. I'm going to be using this banner basic set. I love this with all the banners. I think it would be so much fun to do these in an ombre or a rainbow color scheme. There's also some great little filler images in this set as well, which makes it really versatile. I'm also going to be using the Fleur 1 stamp set. I'm going to be using some of the smaller images in this to accentuate the birthday cake that I'm going to be stamping, and I love this big image here in the corner. I can't wait to use that on another card. Even though I'm not using it today, I just thought I'd point it out because it's that amazing. And finally, I'm going to be using the Sweet Treat set. I'm going to be using that layered up cake there, but there's also some great sentiments and smaller images in this set as well. I needed something that was going to kind of be big and take center stage, so that's why I'm going to be creating that big kind of layered cake on this card today. I'm starting out by adding some of my images that need to be colored onto my mini Misty here, and I'm going to stamp them onto some Neenah Solar White 110-pound cardstock. I am using a COPIC friendly ink here because I will be coloring these images, these particular images here with COPIC markers. Now, I also need to stamp my cake, but there are several stamps that kind of layer together on this one single die cut to create this cake. And when there's multiple stamps on a single die cut, I like to do my die cutting first and then stamp on the die cut. I don't always do this when it's a single image and I'm die cutting it, but when there's multiple images like this cake, I like to use this particular method. You can see I've put my cake kind of negative portion of this die cut into my mini Misty, and I've test stamped the first layer onto that backer paper that's in my mini Misty. And when I know that it's in the right place, I'm going to go ahead and slip my die cut into that negative spot. I'm going to ink it up. I did a couple two-tone inking here, and then I'm going to stamp it onto the die cut. Now I'm creating several of these today, even though you're only going to see one in the finished project. But when I'm creating something like this and I'm taking the time to line it up, I always think it's a good idea to create more than one, and then I have some more cakes stamped for a future card project. Now with the bottom layer, I did the same thing. I lined it up in that negative portion of the die cut. I test stamped it onto my backer sheet, and then I put my die cut into that negative portion and stamped it. And I'm going to finish up the cake by doing the same thing with the center layer. I thought it was easiest to go ahead and do the center layer last so that I can make sure that it was kind of equally spaced between those two layers that I previously stamped, but you could absolutely work from the top down or the bottom up, whatever floats your boat. So now I have my cake stamped and I have all these beautiful colors. I had to use a piece of my Delicate Surface Painter's tape to pick it up out of that negative portion. I find that's kind of easy sometimes. I sometimes just can't get it out of there. So I guess it's a good thing that it's held in place while I'm stamping. Now for these images, I am going to do some very loose Copic coloring. In that, I mean that I'm not even filling these lines all the way to the edge. I'm just kind of scribbling some color in there, a lighter and a darker. I'm not even blending out the darker color. I'm just adding it in a few places for some shadows. And then I'm going to kind of leave it as it is. This gives me almost a watercolor feel because the color doesn't go all the way to the lines. It's very loose and free. And I'm going to be honest with you. It's something that I struggle with because I feel like when I'm using Copic markers, everything has to be perfectly blended and it has to be perfectly inside the lines. But this was particularly freeing in that I didn't have to worry about that because I knew that with these kind of whimsical type images that this coloring style would really work. Now for the cake stand and the leaves, I'm using a couple of G markers. I'm using the G00 marker and the G02. I do think I used a little bit of the G000 in some of the leaves, but in the same way that I colored the flowers, I'm just adding a little color in there. I'm not worrying if it goes all the way to the edges. Adding a little bit of shading. You can see I'm just kind of scribbling it in there with the darker marker, and then I'm leaving it. Now, once I have all of these images colored, I am going to go ahead and use the coordinating die cuts to cut them out. I like to use some delicate surface painter's tape to keep my dies in place as I run it through the die cut machine. And you're gonna see I'm starting to build up my cake over to the right side of the screen, kind of getting an idea for how I want things. Now, because there's several die cut images that make up kind of one single element, I cut a strip of Nina Solar White cardstock, and I am adhering these pieces onto that Nina Solar White cardstock. This is going to allow me to move this and manipulate it as one piece. So rather than having all of these separate die cuts to contend with my image here, I'm just kind of layering them up on that Nina Solar White. I cut it down and then added the cake stand to the bottom. And now I can kind of just treat this as a single die cut image. Makes my job a whole lot easier as I'm kind of moving this around and figuring out where I want everything on my card. Now, to add a little bit of shading to this particular cake, I didn't do a double color of inking on these layers. So I'm just taking some colored pencils that are a little bit darker than the inks that I used to stamp the images, and I'm adding a little bit of shading along the edges and along the bottom of these layers. Now, these flowers were kind of in my way, so I gently took them off. A lot of times when I'm assembling things, I don't push things down really well until I know that everything's good to go. And that gives me a little bit of flexibility to kind of move things around. Now, along the top of this cake, I also added a little bit of this light pink COPIC marker just in that white area, just so that it wasn't quite so stark against that stamped area of the cake. And now I have my cake kind of all ready to go. I am going to add some other details as we go along, but at this point, I wasn't even thinking about that. So I'm taking a piece of masking paper here and I'm drawing an X in the center so that I know where the center of this is. It's cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I used a rectangle die to cut the center out of this. This is going to be a mask for the front of my card because I'm going to do a little ink blending in the center of this card. And I wanted it to be contained to that rectangle area. You could also use like some Post-it tape or some sticky Post-its to create this rectangle area in the center of your card. This was just the easiest way that I could think to do it. And now I'm taking a little bit of this really light colored yellow ink and kind of pouncing it and blending it very lightly into this area. Now for this card front, I did use a textured cardstock, which is not ideal for ink blending. But you can see I'm going in with a very, very light hand to begin with. And as I start to build the color, I can kind of increase my pressure to build up the color. The key is going in light at first, especially when you're blending with a cardstock that maybe isn't quite friendly to ink blending, and kind of just building up the color over time. Really take your time. Now I heat set that because I'm going to do a little embossing on it, and I pulled my mask off. I shouldn't have done that, but I learned my lesson, and I'm just using some scrap paper now to create my mask around this rectangle area, and I'm stamping some of those basic banners into that rectangle area. Now, because I'm not doing a whole lot of blending over it, those little pieces of scrap paper worked perfectly fine. I stamped these basic banners in some Versamark ink, and I added some Ranger Sticky embossing powder. And then I'm going to go ahead and go in with another stamp and stamp that as well. That embossing powder helped me see where I had already stamped, so I knew where to add this other banner. And I'm coating that with the sticky embossing powder as well. Now, when you heat the sticky embossing powder, watch how quickly this sets up. You can see it changing colors. You want to make sure your heat gun is good and hot. And as soon as it turns, move on, because if you overheat this, it loses its stick. So I left that entire embossing kind of segment there in real time, so you could see exactly how quickly that set up. So now that I have my heat set sticky embossing powder, I'm taking my card front into this box here. I'm using some Nuvo Gilding Flakes. They can tend to be a little bit messy, so I do work in a box when I'm using them. And I've just taken a few of those gold flakes and I'm pressing them into that sticky embossing powder. You can see I'm just working them in with my fingers. And when I have all of that sticky embossing powder coated, I'm going to pick this up, kind of dust off the excess, and you can see I have some really beautiful kind of gilded banners there for the background of my card. Now I decided that a debossed area around this rectangle would look really nicely. I grabbed the original die that I used for the mask at first, and I'm going to trade this out for a little bit larger one. And in order to emboss with a die, I'm going to set up my die cut machine just like I would be embossing. So I have the tab 1 for the big shot. Then I have my cutting plate, and I have that tan silicone mat. I have my paper with the die facing down towards the silicone mat. I did use a piece of scratch paper just to protect my gilding flakes, and then I finished off my sandwich with a second cutting plate, and I'm running that through. And you can see when I remove this die, which is a little bit larger than the one that I used to create the mask, I'm going to have this really cool debossed line detail around that masked area. Now at this point, I decided my cake needed some more details, and it would have been a whole heck of a lot easier if I would have done this from the beginning, but this is the way I work. I get these crazy ideas halfway through and I do it the hard way, but you can see I've just lined up the little details, the little buntings and stuff on my mini Misty, and I'm stamping them right onto that stamped and die cut cake. I do have a little bit of foam adhesive, but I made it work. But if you do it from the beginning, it's a whole lot easier. Now for my sentiment, I embossed this birthday wishes onto a piece of vellum, and now I'm taking it over to my trimmer, and I am trimming right up to that descender on the Y, and then I'm picking up my blade and trimming on the other side of it. And then I'm going to fussy cut around that Y, just the bottom portion. This is kind of a fun way to do sentiments when you have a descender and you want kind of that banner look. But if I were to leave the descender in there, the banner would get really large. So by doing it this way, I can keep my banner a little bit kind of towards the thinner side and still have that Y intact, and it gives it kind of a fun look. So you can see I went in with a gold paint pen and I added some gold details to my cake. I've assembled my card. I added a little bit of the Nuvo glitter gloss shimmer pen. I'm adding some sparkling clear sequins, and I have already attached my banner, but I decided I wanted to kind of have a wave look to it. So I'm just using a small piece of foam adhesive behind a portion of this banner, and I'm kind of pushing it over towards the left and holding it in place with that foam adhesive. That gives me a little bit of wave in the banner. And then for the end that's kind of free and floating out there on the right, I'm going to use my finger and gently kind of create some curl. And that gives the banner like this really cool, wavy, kind of flowing in the wind look. I think this is great for something that you're going to deliver by hand. I wouldn't necessarily put this one through the mail, but it is a fun kind of different effect that you can create with your banner sentiments on your card. It's a lot easier with something like vellum than it would be with cardstock, but I love the way that this turned out. So that completes my card for today. A really fun and feminine birthday card with lots of shimmery and shiny details between the gold paint pen and the gilding flakes and the gold embossing and that glitter pin. I mean, come on. I love the way that this turned out, and I love the fun, whimsical design of this cake combined with those floral images from the Fleur 1 stamp set. As always, I will have links to the featured supplies in the description at YouTube, but head on over to my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com. I'll have it linked below. Over there, you'll find more still shots, more information, and a complete list of supplies. Over on my blog, you'll also find some information about an exclusive Instagram giveaway that I'm doing. It's a prize pack featuring some of my favorite Pinkfresh Studio products. Thanks for stopping by and hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you won't miss any of my paper crafting and card making video tutorials. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.